Now listen, we all know about alcohol addiction. We know about drug addiction. People probably recognize chocolate addiction, probably shopaholics, anything with a holic after it. We kind of all know about this stuff. But I'm fed up time and time again of speaking to people that do not realize that there is such thing as food addiction. So to get the message across, I've invited the brilliant Dr. Vera Tarman, who wrote this book called Food Junkies, onto the show to tell us more about how real food addiction is. Vera, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Steve, for asking. I'm thrilled to speak with you.
The pleasure's all mine, I promise you. So let's dive straight in. Tell us all about the work that you do in the US, about your book, which we'll promote all the way through, which says Recover from Food Addiction. Just the floor's all yours. The microphone's all yours. Tell us all about how real food addiction is.
Okay, I will. So I'll give you a little bit of my background. So I work I actually work in Canada, and I am a medical director of one of Canada's largest treatment centers for drugs and alcohol addiction. So I see people who come into our residence. It's a residential program for a month, a month or 28 days. And they come in because they want to quit alcohol, they want to quit cocaine, they want to quit opiates, and anything in between. But those are the three big ones. They don't come in because they want to quit sugar. They come in because they want to quit those drugs. And I probably like 10,000 people a year, a lot of people. And I see a similar pattern repeatedly, that they either, I see it because I look for it now, but even before, when I wasn't looking for it, it was like I kept getting slapped in the face with this awareness that, get that person to put down their substance. And before you knew it, they were eating, and they would say to me, Dr. Tarman, why am I eating so much? Mostly they would be looking at the scale and going, wow, I gained 20 pounds in 2 weeks. And then, why am I eating so much? And then, I'll ask them, well, are you eating foods that are like candies and pastries? And of course, in the treatment center, what do we give them but that stuff? And they're just wolfing it down. They never used to eat like that before, they'll claim. To me, and some of the more insightful people would say, I'm eating this stuff as if I were still drinking or using my substance. And then when I started to see this on a repeated pattern, I started asking, what about before you picked up your substance? Like before you even started smoking cigarettes? When do people usually start smoking? In their teenage years. What was your eating like before that? And they would often say, not all of them, some of them, their addiction started with their drug of choice, what we say DLC. But some of them, a lot of them would say, well, as a child, I used to eat all the cookies in sight. And, when I was, the house was quiet at night, I would sneak upstairs to the kitchen and grab all the stuff. And I don't eat like that anymore. And to me, that was like, of course they didn't, because they found cigarettes and they didn't need the food anymore, or they found the alcohol or whatever drug, marijuana, that they picked up, and then they didn't need anymore. But then here they are, they're coming to our treatment center, and now they're eating like voraciously, uncontrollably. And that to me, just because I see a select group of people who are addicted, was just such an obvious transfer, what we call transfer addiction. But then I started looking in the general population, and sure enough, in the general population, we see the same behavior. And it would come from people who would say, I'm not an addict. My husband is the addict. Why do they keep drinking or using drugs? And I tell them not to, and they say they're going to try to stop, and they can't. But there they are coming to see me because they're overweight and they're struggling with food, not connecting the dots. So it's my job to help people connect those dots.
So a couple of things there. First of all, apologies. I said you're in America, you're in Canada.
That's okay.
And I know that can, there are a few other countries in the world where you get it wrong, you get really told off, so I do apologize.
Yeah.
Second thing is, I want to just extract something from that. So, and I know I've got slightly addictive, personality, in the fact that I talk health all day, and then I know I drink too many glasses of wine. So, first question is then, if you've got an addictive personality, I was saying if you stop one, unless you have some mechanism to stop you going to another one, you're likely to just move it from one
Yeah,
thing to another unless you've learned the
exactly.
techniques to stop that happening.
Yes, that's absolutely what happens, transfer addiction. And we see that often when people quit smoking, then they find, oh my God, now I'm eating all the time. And then they sometimes will say, and I see this even with cocaine addicts, people who quit using cocaine, now they're using sugar. And they say, you know what, I'd rather go back to the cocaine. I'd rather go back to smoking rather than gain this 20, 30, 40 pounds. Or they'll placate themselves by saying, well, when you quit smoking, you're going to gain weight. You're only supposed to gain, like the research says, about 7 to 10 pounds, or what would that be in kilos? I don't know,
Yeah,
five
that's
plus
fine. Pounds
kilos.
are good.
Yeah, that's a lot, but it's not the 20, 30, 40 pounds that people gain. And that's the transfer addiction. And the important thing to know about transfer addiction, and this is why I get really upset when people feel shamed about their alcoholism or their otherism, whatever it is that they have. By their partner or by somebody who's wolfing down the ice cream and the candies, because they say that's not as bad of an addiction as your drug that's causing bankruptcy in the house, emotional and financial bankruptcy. Yeah, but sugar does the same thing. It's just it's on a lower level. You don't see it, but it does have the same devastating effects. And there is a parallel besides just the behavior. It's all about the dopamine. It's the neurochemistry in the brain. It goes to the very same place. And whether you go to Rome in the back roads or you go to Rome on the highway, it doesn't matter. You get to Rome and you have the effects of being in Rome, which in this case is addiction. And what are the devastating effects of addiction ultimately? Well, with food addiction, it's diabetes, it's a heart disease, it's stroke. Like you die the same as you do an opiate overdose, just not right away.
Yeah, all roads lead to Rome. I like that.
Yeah,
It's a really, really good
which
point.
is dopamine. Dopamine is the Rome.
So I think we'll park dopamine because I think that will end up being the crux of what we talk about throughout
Okay,
the next sort of 40 minutes or so. And it needs to be the crux as far as I understand, but you'll tell me
yeah,
otherwise. Let's
for
first of all
sure.
go back to food addiction. For many, many years, people said it doesn't exist. It can't exist. How can you be, addicted to food? But I guess that's mainly for the beneficial or the benefits of those big food companies that are
Oh
getting
yeah,
us hooked to those things. That advert
absolutely.
that once Lay's, they were openly said, once you've had one, you can't stop. They even admitted that
Exactly.
it was an addiction by once you've had one, you can't stop. And my
They
kids,
they
sadly, because I can't get all the cereals out of the house, we still have one or two boxes of cereals. One's even called Crave. In other words, crave
yes,
it.
they boast about it.
So
Yeah.
where do we start on this one? Let's first
You,
of
you,
all convince everybody that it is an addiction.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's a fellow who wrote The End of Overeating, David Kessler. I think he was the head of the not the FDA, but some major organization in the States about healthcare or public health. And he wrote a book called The End of Overeating. And this was now probably 15 years ago. So he was one of the pioneers that started drawing this concept of food addiction to awareness. And he even his book, he didn't want to use the word addiction. He used the word craveability, palatability, just like the food industry boasts about how food is palatable and highly palatable and craving, but they don't want to use the dirty word of addiction, because addiction implies, well, it's that cocaine addict who's got the bag, or the alcoholic in the alleyway behind your house that's causing grief to himself and the neighbors. you know uh, and the sugar industry wants to have those addicts at their disposal, but they want them to be uh, let's not call it that. Let's just make it look good, and it's acceptable. In fact,
yeah.
it's considered. Not only does the food industry make it look acceptable, they make it look like positive. So on Valentine's Day, what do you give your lover? You give them chocolates. Christmas, what do you give the family that you love? You make them your special recipe cake or whatever. So they've really made it. Um, not only is it negative, but it's a positive thing, and that's all marketing. That's all a deliberate ploy to keep the addict, making them feel okay, that it's okay to be this way.
Yeah, in
And
fact,
anyway, about David Kessler, let me just finish the story. I
yeah.
actually got through to him once and emailed him and said, "Why don't you just call it what it is? It's addiction." And he said, "They won't listen. If you say the word addiction, the person will not pick up my book. Like they won't, and then they won't get the message." So it's been a careful edging into the population. And so here I am speaking with you, and often when I speak to people, I don't use the word food addiction. I use the word sugar addiction because people are like, yeah, I get that I'm addicted to sugar. But to tell you the truth, I believe, and so do many of us in the field. Jen Unwin, as a great example, we believe it's not just sugar; it's food addiction. And of course, it's not food. It's not vegetables. It's not Brussels sprouts. It's the cereals. It's basically the processed food industry. And we've got to battle the image making that the food industry makes, because they make us look like we're hysterical hyenas shouting about nothing, when in fact we're physicians pulling our hair out saying, look, this is diabetes that we're trying to fight, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So what we'll do, actually, we'll put a little video clip in here in a minute when we do the edit, because there's a company called Shiverdan or something like that in Switzerland, and they're like a $9 billion company, and all they do is put flavoring into all the other products. And I've got a video clip from, I think it was the CBS 60-minute program, where they openly admit their job is to get people addicted to the ingredients and the products. And I also did a great interview with Stephen Whitley, who was at Nestle for many years, Dr. Stephen Whitley, who wrote the book Why We Love Junk Food. And he talks about the bliss point, how these big food companies are always trying to get the bliss point. What's the maximum amount of sugar, the maximum amount of salt, the maximum amount of fat that they can put in, not the good fat, the bad fat, to the point where it gets you addicted, but then they don't go over the top and they make it unpalatable. So this whole thing has become a science for these food companies. Like you say, it's not the farmer that does it. It's not the cattle herder. It doesn't happen with beef. It doesn't happen with broccoli. It happens with anything where you have multiple ingredients, where somebody's making a lot of money. I'd like to also pick up on something that I'd love your view on it. I say in some ways, the food industry is worse than the cigarette industry and the drug industry and the alcohol industry, because at the end of the day, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, in many ways are, it's a choice. We do it, but we don't have to do it to live. But we do have to eat food, and therefore messing with food to get us addicted to food is, in my mind, more evil than messing with cigarettes and alcohol, because that is a lifestyle choice, whereas food is not a choice.
Exactly. And it's so messing with it that even those of us who are more aware and we're trying to eat well, so we've been told, well, go to the grocery store and eat on the aisles, like not the aisles, sorry, the around the where the produce is. Don't go in the middle of the store where all the processed food is. But the food industry has become so crafty that now they're starting to introduce not all, but lots of processed ingredients that are not healthy, even in the safe parts of the grocery store. So that as I'm going browsing through my beets and my lettuces and my apples, I'm going to see little bits of condiments and stuff that I can add, or I'm going to use those apples maybe to make something. And that stuff is not healthy, because really, when we say you can't eat food, like we need food to eat, we don't need processed food to eat. We need good food to eat, like unrefined carbohydrates and proteins and fats. But even in those parts of the store, the food industry is infiltrating. So they're deliberately sneaking into our brains, basically. Yeah. It's not that different than the fentanyl creator, who is now, fentanyl is a powerful opiate, and it's addictive in and of itself. But now people, the fentanyl creators, whoever they are introducing benzodiazepines, other addictive drugs on top of an already super addictive drug, because they want that person to come back to them. How is that different than the food industry? I mean, we could go on and on about that, because it's quite enraging if you get into that mindset. It's actually political.
I was coaching a diabetic type 2 recently, and they said, Steve, I'm doing all the things you told me. I'm only eating chicken. I'm only eating beef burgers. I've cut all the rubbish out. I'm not losing the weight. What's going on? I went, oh, I'm confused here. I'll come around the supermarket with you and you show me what you're picking, right?
Yes.
So we get around the supermarket. So first of all, the chicken that he was eating was in the frozen section. And when I turned the box around, only about 30 to 40% was chicken. And it was actually chicken, Kevin. It was stuffed with this, that, and the other one. Well, you're addicted to that still.
Right.
And then we looked at the beef burgers. Well, there wasn't very much beef in there, but there was 4 different types of sugar in the beef burger. So, you know, even the things that you think are super healthy, if it's in a box with a label, it's engineered for addiction.
Yes, yeah, and that's why we say it's not just sugar addiction; it's food addiction. I mean, and there's a whole phenomena, because addiction is a very complex disorder, and it starts with the obvious things like sugar, but it can morph into far more than just that.
So we said we'd touch a lot on dopamine, and I'm going to give you my understanding of it, and then I want you to either say yes or no, but also then elaborate on it. So first of all, we too many people confuse pleasure and happiness. Pleasure is dopamine driven.
Yes.
Happiness is serotonin driven. Again, even the big food companies and all companies play on that a little bit to make us even more confused, because McDonald's go, I'm loving it, I'm loving it, I'm loving it. Well, loving is happiness and not pleasure. So you shouldn't say I'm loving it. You should say, well, I'm getting pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. We're all chasing too much dopamine. We're not chasing enough serotonin. Pleasure is a reward. We get pleasure from the alcohol, the drugs, the cigarettes, the sugar, the food that gets stuffed with things. So first of all, is that kind of right so far?
Yeah, you got it right on. And I'm just going to add to that. That's exactly it. So it's pleasure seeking, and dopamine is, it's exciting. And the other thing about dopamine is it's the excitement of anticipation. As I'm about to make this cake that I'm making and I'm about to eat it, I'm thinking about how delicious it is. But it's not ultimately satisfying. So that person who's eating the piece of cake, the first taste might be delicious because that's dopamine as well. But after a certain point, it's not delicious anymore, but you keep eating it because you keep hoping that you're going to get that buzz back, which is what we call chasing the dragon. You're trying to get a memory of something, a euphoric experience that you remember having, but you never really get it. So the charge of dopamine is initially exciting, but it's ultimately dissatisfying. It's like you're scratching an itch and it just won't stop itching. And it becomes actually a little bit agitating and quite unpleasant, which ultimately addiction is not a pleasant disease. It might start off, you enjoy the glass of wine, you enjoy that first cigarette in the morning. I mean, I'm an ex-smoker. I know what that feels like, that first cigarette. It's delicious. But then, by the end of the cigarette, you're wanting the second. It's not delicious anymore. And you end up smoking throughout the day or eating throughout the day just so you don't feel agitated, because that itch is still there.
Yeah.
So it's not a pleasant feeling. And in normal life, dopamine is our natural neurochemical of anticipation. You've asked me to speak. I'm interested to, see what your questions are, what the reception will be. Like, there's a curiosity that I have that will motivate me to sit through an interview and then to do the next thing I have to do in a day. It's the things of life. And I need that little bit of something that makes me interested and curious. That's natural dopamine. And if I do that at the end of the day, like tonight, I'm going to come back home and I'm going to go, I got to my doctor's appointment. I had this interview and it went well. Like, now I'm experiencing serotonin, which is that sense of satisfaction and contentment that I've done the things I wanted to do today. I was asked to do things. That's even a good thing. So it's like dopamine gets us up out of bed, and serotonin puts us back into bed with that sense of contentment. Addiction blows that out of the water because it makes you want to jump out of bed and grab, and you can never satisfy that grabbiness. It's not possible. You'd have to take a drug that gives you an excess amount of serotonin, and that doesn't. I mean, there is a drug that does that, but it just can't match the dopamine.
Yeah.
Because I think we're built as animals to be more charged with dopamine than serotonin. Ultimately, at the end of the day, me as an animal, evolutionary wise, I need to get up out of bed, and whether I'm satisfied when I come back isn't as important as just getting up out of bed. So there's a preferential default that you can really blow up the dopamine to high heights, but you can't really do much with serotonin. Yeah.
So what we're saying is it's a natural thing to be reward driven. You know, if you
Yes.
don't get out of bed, if you don't have sex, you know, as a species,
Exactly.
so the monkey brain, the primitive brain here is so dopamine
Exactly.
driven, because without
Yeah.
that, no getting out of bed, no chasing that animal down the road to get dinner, no sex, because, you know, happiness is great, and that's. But the problem today, of course, is we've got so many things commercialized, playing
Yes.
on that primitive brain, that dopamine sort of ride that we need. I also want to
Right.
go back a bit as well, because you said something absolutely fascinating, which I remember Eric Edamede said to me once. He said, Steve, when you have that whiskey, he says, when do you feel the best? And I went, when I've decided that I'm going to be naughty right now and have it. And he said, and is that the best bit? I went, yeah, as soon as I've gone, I've been good, I haven't had one for a week, I haven't touched a drink for a week, oh, I'm going to have it, I'm going to be really naughty, I'm going to have it. The dopamine kicks in then. Probably
Yeah.
better than when you even drink it. But then you
Absolutely.
confuse. The brain goes, I'm getting pleasure from the whiskey. No, you're getting pleasure from the decision to have the whiskey, not the
Right.
whiskey
The
itself.
anticipation. Yes. Yes, absolutely. That's dopamine. And you've given a really good illustration of how dopamine is not just triggered by the substance itself. Like if I drink something, if I eat something, especially something sweet, I get extra dopamine for sure. But even just anticipating that I'm going to, like you just described, will give me dopamine as well. Dopamine can be maxed out through behavior, through anticipation, and through the actual substance. It's a very powerful neurochemical. And in fact, if I'm flatlining on my dopamine and I don't have any dopamine on board, or not very much, I'm depressed. It's like I don't want to do anything. Like we need it to survive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other one is, of course, it's a bit like, two things that come to mind then. It's a bit like we look forward, certainly as a kid, you look forward to the holiday, You can't, all you can think about for months and months in
Yes.
ahead is the holiday. It's going to be great. But then you get there, it's still good, but it's not quite what you dreamt. Or Christmas
It's not as
Day,
good,
get
exactly.
so excited. The dopamine in the excitement building up to the event
Exactly.
is often
Once
better
you
than the event itself.
Yeah, once you're there, then it's the serotonin that'll kick in, and where you say, oh, it's wonderful, it's so nice and hot, and I'm by the pool and I get to do all that stuff. That's all very nice, but it's not as big as the dopamine. I mean, that's exactly it. Dopamine is it's much more inflatable than serotonin, but it shows us, because we're such an addiction-ridden society, like on so many ways. If it's not drinking, if it's not eating sugar, which is the biggest, I think it's probably the biggest one. It's internet, it's shopping, like you said, it's all of those things. But guess we have such a huge what we call problem with depression. Like what's one of the highest prescribed drugs of all? It's the antidepressants, which are the serotonin boosters. I mean, just it's probably more complicated than that, but it's serotonin enhanced enhancers, essentially, because we're so low on our serotonin, it can't match the dopamine that we're sort of living on. And it's not a surprise that we're so heavily medicated, because we're so lopsided with our dopamine.
So what is the answer? Because you're right, probably most people are addicted to something. Again, I don't have a problem with this, but I guess if I stopped having my glasses of wine in the evening, maybe I'd become addicted to this.
I think that's a
what is
very
the answer?
you know
How
what?
do we
Alcohol.
balance that serotonin and dopamine, or make dopamine not so important in the brain because we've got more serotonin? Or give me advice on tonight. Tonight's all right, actually, I'm playing tennis tonight, but tomorrow night when I'm at home and the wife's opened the bottle of wine, what's going to stop me? How do I stop jumping in and having 2 or 3 glasses of wine?
So I mean, there's a couple of ways to answer that question, but I will say you probably heard the phrase, because it's a meme, I guess, a cultural meme, which is the opposite of addiction is connection. It's not non-addiction or to stop something. It's the opposite of addiction. So addiction is too much dopamine, and connection is serotonin, and we want to get a leveling out so that the dopamine and the serotonin can match each other. That would be serenity or sobriety, successful and happy sobriety. So when a person is saying, okay, I'm going to stop my substance, the first thing you want to do is not let yourself be transferred to another. So if you're stopping your glass of wine, you're going to be tempted, well, I'll have a dessert instead. So you don't want to do that, because that's just transfer the addiction. And I got to tell you, I've had crystal meth addicts, and crystal meth is a pretty devastating addiction. It's very, very hard to stop. They all say, you know what, quitting sugar was harder than quitting crystal meth. I've had a number of people with crystal meth addiction say that. It's not just one. It's not an N of one. It's an N of many, who say that sugar is probably one of the most addictive substances. In the same way that they'll say that cigarettes are a lot more addictive than quitting alcohol. I mean, you kind of pick your poison, but you don't want to transfer from one addiction to another, especially if the other one is going to be harder to quit. But then the second thing that you might want to know is, ultimately, what is the solution? You want to find something that gives serotonin contentment. You don't want to keep chasing the dragon, the dopamine, and matching the high. And that means you're going to have to accept that life will not be as exciting and as predictable, because dopamine is the drug of, the neurochemical of anticipation. So you predict, I want to be happy now, but not right now, because right now I'm doing a talk. But, at the end of the talk, then I'm going to have my cigarette or whatever it is. I don't smoke, but I'm just giving you an example. Yeah. So you have to sort of accept that you can't predict and have as high, but then you're gonna actually feel more pleasure. Not see, even I'm using the word pleasure, contentment of just normal life. Like, wow, that was a good book that I just read. I'm really enjoying my company talking with you. Like that's serotonin. The opposite of addiction is a connection. So you're gonna want to focus more on that. But before you get to that, you have to go through what we call withdrawal. Because addiction, your dopamine has been jacked up, and now you want to let it recalibrate back to normal. And that process is time consuming. It's about 3, 4, 5 weeks, depending on the drug. So that means you're going to be miserable for a month, which is why a lot of treatment centers are a month long, because we basically lock you up. So that you can't go out and say, I can't stop drinking, I'm going to go and have something anyway. And we say, no, you can't, because the doors are locked and we're watching you. You get through that period of time, and then the dopamine has resized itself so that you don't need that higher amount.
So that's a good question then, is that, you can get dopamine from exercise. A lot of people go, well, I've given up this. And the way I gave it up was, I'm running every day, or I'm going to the gym every day, and I'm getting, that's my new thing. That's new. My new hit is my fitness and all that, which is fantastic. And I'm not ever saying that people shouldn't exercise, because it's absolutely fantastic and wonderful and good for your health. But I guess even that, you've got to be careful of, if you then go full on flat out exercise, that, you can't run forever and you can't weightlift forever. That if that's the new dopamine rush, even that is just keeping you dopamine driven. And while that's fantastic that you're doing that, it's really understanding in the brain that there's two sides of the seesaw. There's the pleasure, instant reward, give me gratification now, dopamine driven. Then there's up here, we've got the pleasure, the happiness, we've got the serotonin. And how do we get the brain to realize this is important, if not more important?
Well, it's hard to do, because we're driven, even as just naturally human creatures, like animals, that the dopamine immediate high. It's basically, we're programmed by default mode to choose that first, because that's where our survival exists. Like, all of us are born with some slight sweet preference, because that's dopamine. And why? Because sweet, especially sweet fatty, salty, because those are all energy dense and they are life sustaining, especially if you're in deficit, so that you'll save your life immediately. If you're having a sugar crash or whatever, you'll save your life immediately. But that's implied that we're needing to constantly be on guard and responding quickly. In our life today, as so many people have said, there are no more winters. There's no need to hibernate. Life is in abundance throughout the whole. We're still living as if there's a feast and famine life out there. you feast when the food is there, because who knows when you'll eat again. But of course, we know we're going to eat again in 3 hours.
Yeah.
We could eat again in 5 minutes. But our body hasn't been programmed to that. So the dopamine is already primed, which is in a way not good. Like, I'd like to say it's easier than this, but it's not. Recovery is going to be ultimately recognizing I will always want more than I actually should have to thrive as a human being. I will always want a little bit more. And so there's a little level of distress tolerance, of anxiety tolerance, of disappointment with. There's always going to be that. And folks, that's what sobriety is. And in the 12-step literature, we even say, you're going to trudge your road to happy destiny. You're not going to skip and be thrilled and excited. You're going to trudge your way through, because contentment is, it's not always happy, but it's content.
Yeah.
And so some of it is just, that's why I'm saying right sizing the ego. But the good news is, there is good news for people who are going, oh my God, life is going to be boring all the time. No, it's not going to be boring all the time. There's going to be times when it's like a thrill, your grandchild comes home, or you get a new dog, or something happens, but it won't be on demand, and it won't be as often as you want. But when it does come, it'll be extra special.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. A few things to pick up on there. I went on a boys' ski weekend about 5 or 6 weekends ago. One of my doctor friends last year was drinking as much as we all were. And he said, do you still want me to come? I said, of course, why? He said, well, I haven't had a drink for a year, and I'm not going to drink on the boys' weekend. I went, look, you're my mate, you're Dr. Dan, you're coming on the boys' weekend, it'll be absolutely fine. But I tell you what, by the end of the week, and we carried on drinking and he didn't, he had just as good time. He never woke up with a headache. He enjoyed it. He remembered what we talked about the night before, what games we played.
Yes.
So in the end, he did have the better time, but he'd gone through the pain sort of 9 months ago or so on. And also, the other thing I wanted to pick up on was, I've written 2 courses. I've got a course that's about losing weight. I've got a course that's about reversing your diabetes. Both have got about 60 hours of content in. But in the first 20 minutes in both of those, I say the same thing, which is what you've just said, is that we're hardwired to eat. That's what we have to do. We have to eat to survive. Starvation's been, for humanity, the number one cause of death throughout humanity. So the brain is hardwired to eat. And the big food, so that's the first thing. But then the big food companies make it even worse. That thing you just talked about, calorie density. So in every bite, they try and get as many calories into the brain goes, I'm loving this because I'm getting so many calories in one bite. And the way you get calorie density is to get speed. So, I mean, a real chicken nugget, I don't know if you've ever cooked them at home yourself, you chew because chicken's chewy. Get a chicken nugget from the fast food places, or even in the frozen aisle of the supermarket. You waft one down in about 3 seconds, and it's like calorie density really quickly, because that's the way you get calorie density. Just waft it down. So we've got the human need for food, messed around by the big food companies. So it's not the consumer's fault that they're addicted to sugar or food or fast food, let's say. It's not their fault. And I think what I've learned from you today is to accept that it's not your fault, but you have to get out of that trap. And that is, everybody tells you, oh, it's going to be a plain sailing road. It'd be absolutely fine. You go skipping down that road. I think what you're saying is you're not going to skip down that road. And that's why most clinics are like 4 weeks, because it's not going to be happy from day one. But you have to, A, recognize it's an addiction, B, understand that you will be happier in the long term. But it takes a bit to get there. And the only thing we haven't touched on yet, and I'd like to touch on, which is this thing about tolerance, which goes that I'll watch my friend eating loads and loads of cakes because he used to have 1 cake, but now he needs 10 cakes to get the same benefit. 1 glass of wine honestly doesn't touch the side anymore, probably not even 2, probably not even 3. And I try and limit it to 3, but I know when I'm at a party, it's way more than 3. Because it doesn't touch, because the brain's tolerate. The dopamine goes, I need more. Explain tolerance to me a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's a great question to ask, because that's actually when tolerance happens. That's actually when the addiction, the excitement starts to become not exciting anymore. Because ultimately, people don't come to see me as an addiction physician, or for food or whatever, until they're suffering. And so addiction starts off with, oh, I get to do these exciting things whenever I want. But in the end, it's like, it doesn't work. Even if I have a bottle of wine, it's still not good. All I do is I feel sick. And I still keep wanting more because I'm trying to chase something. And so they come because addiction ultimately ends up being a very morally depraved. It feels that way. I feel like I'm a skunk, and there's no pleasure to be had anywhere. I mean, people come on their knees, feeling devastated, morally bankrupt, I think is the term, both physically, mentally, and spiritually, like it all. And why did that happen? Because of this concept of tolerance. Because what happens is, let's go back to the biology of addiction. So we talked about dopamine. This is our natural neurochemical of excitement that keeps me, gets me up out of bed to do things that I have to do. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother. And then I just stumble upon sugar or something that gives me extra, like the cigarette, the drink, the whatever it is. And now I'm like, wow, this is great. I don't need to do all sorts of exciting big things. I can just have a drink or just have an extra bit of sugar and I'm going to feel good. And that's all great for a while. But then what happens is the body goes, wait a minute. You're only supposed to have so much to get you up out of bed, but you're not supposed to have 24/7 of this, because you have to be able to go to sleep. You have to be able to do other things. But you're defying what nature wants you to have, which is just a little bit of a boost to get up out of bed. Now you're having this big boost all the time, and the brain it ends up being too much in the brain. And so the brain has, in general, it has a principle, not the brain, the body itself. It's called homeostasis. Things should be the same. And except for the occasional a little bit more. But if you're having the occasional little bit more all the time, it's not the same anymore. It's too much. So the brain is actually going to say, okay, let's rein back and make that extra bit feel like the same. And tolerance develops when the neurochemicals readjust so that that little bit of extra feels normal, feels like it did before when I didn't have anything at all. So that now I need some sugar just to get through the night to fall asleep. It's not even for the pleasure of the food. Before it was I'm eating the food to watch my Netflix show and it's all exciting. Now it's just I need it or I won't be able to go to sleep at night. Okay, so that's called tolerance. I need to have a bowl of ice cream as opposed to nothing just to feel normal. But if you want to have the excitement of the ice cream because that's the expectation you've developed, you're going to have 2 bowls or 3. And so then you're constantly trying to chase that euphoric buzz, but the body's going to catch up and say, no. 3, we're going to make it feel like nothing. And so then you're at 6 bowls of ice cream, and eventually you're feeling nothing. It's like, I can't win. You can't win. Biology will not let you win. And it's because of this concept of tolerance. And when that happens, addiction isn't happy anymore. It's, holy God, I have to have 6 bowls of ice cream, or I have to have a bottle and a half of wine.
Yeah.
What's it doing to my liver just so that I can go to sleep? It's no longer happy, but you can't stop, because if you stop, then you're going to have withdrawal, which is even worse than 0, nothing. And that's this is essentially the dynamic and the disease of addiction progressing until you're finally at a place where you're going, I have to stop because I have now got cirrhosis, or I've now got diabetes. I'm now so overweight that I'm going to be using a wheelchair. I've got to stop, Vera. But you can't stop, because if you stop, your 6 bowls of ice cream is equal to 0. Well, if you don't have 6 bowls of ice cream, you're minus. And that's very painful.
Yeah. A friend of mine said, Steve, you like winning, don't you? I went, well, yeah, I like winning. So he said, well, okay, glass 1 of wine, you're winning. Glass 2, you're probably even with the wine company. Glass 3, glass 4, the wine company's winning. Glass 5, glass 6, you are massively losing. You only win on the first one. And if you can't stop at the first one, then you just got to go numb.
That's a very good way to describe it. I like that because in the addiction world, we say, one is too many and 1,000 is not enough. But in the larger world where not everybody's an addict, I like that. It's like if you can win with one, you're a winner. But if you can't, don't even go further because you're going to lose. I like that.
Yeah, I thought it's a good analogy to go. Well, and then so I'm doing a marathon in a few weeks, 8 weeks time, and
Oh,
so next month I'm not going to touch a drop. That's certainly my intention. And then the question is, what happens the month after? Well, in fact, 2 months with that. What happens the month after? And you have one. Can you stop then? And if you can, that's great, but probably because I've got that addictive personality. So it may be that I just have to go, just like I've done with sugary cakes and things. I used to be a smoker as well. That's all stopped.
that's
So I'm
yeah.
probably just going to have to go, look, no.
Yeah, if I can just give you a little bit of a warning,
Please.
and this applies to sugar the same way. You'll see that a lot of people will, they've gained weight. This is like their first diet. They gain weight and they lose, and because they've been eating sugar and they've got diabetes, and they decide, okay, I'm going to stop, and they stop, and it wasn't that hard, and it's like, okay, great, I'm stopped, and then they decide after a month or two, whatever it is, they've achieved their weight goal. Or their metabolic goal, and then they decide, well, I'll have a little bit of something. And what we see happening is that the addiction just jumps right back in, and it's even worse. And so what ends up happening is people gain the weight back plus. And that's very discouraging. And why is that? It's got to do with the neurochemistry in the background. The addiction, once that tolerance thing has started, that sort of phenomena of tolerance, that's a biological or a neurological change that's happened in the brain. And we often argue, those of us who believe food is addiction or addiction is a disease, will say there's actually been a change in the brain. And it's like once a person has had seizures, they're more likely to have seizures again. Once a person has had diabetes, put them back into their food environment that created the diabetes, they're more quickly to develop diabetes again, and worse. It's a chronic progressive condition, addiction. And if you stop and then restart, there's a good chance that the addiction will be even worse. And we've seen people who have said, literally, I'm 350 pounds and I dieted my weight up to this. Like, how is that possible? Because the addiction just got worse each time. So if you do decide, Steve, that you're going to stop, beware, because you might actually find that your desire to drink is even more. And if that's the case, that's your warning. One is definitely you're not a winner. Like, you'll have to find that out for yourself. But that would be a really good example. And it gets harder each time you keep trying to stop. It's the other thing we see with addiction.
Yeah, and another friend said to me, it's a good way, if you can look at, rather than saying I'm giving something up, I'm giving up the cakes on the front of your book, or I'm giving up the wine,
Right.
you're giving up something that means you're losing out. If you can say I'm escaping from the donuts,
Yes.
or I'm escaping from
Yes.
the wine, or I'm so anti-corporate, even though I run a corporate with like 500 staff in the UK, but we don't behave like a corporate. I'm so anti-corporate, for me, it's like, right, I'm not giving up my glass of wine. For others, it might be, I'm not giving up that. I'm escaping from it. And certainly
Absolutely.
there was a guy called Alan Carr that was brilliant in helping people give up smoking. I think he was in the UK. His books were amazing. And that was one of his lines. He said, don't think of it as giving up. Think of it as escaping, and then it becomes a different thing. Because you think of it as giving up, you're right. You have that period of abstinence. And if you think you're giving up every day, you're still thinking about it. I want the donut. I want the donut. I want the donut.
Yes.
And then when you have it, it's like, well, I'm being naughty. I might as well have all the donuts on the front of your books. I've already broken my own rules. And then before you know it, you're back in where you were before, even not worse.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So the naysayers will say it's the deprivation line. They'll say, you don't want to deprive yourself on Christmas or your birthday of having some nice thing. You don't want to deprive your children of having this exciting food. And what we say is, first of all, deprivation is only part of the withdrawal. It's 2 or 3 weeks, and then you won't feel deprived. That's super important to say, that the deprivation does not exist. Usually what people will say, especially if they've gone through the depths of of addiction, the way that I've described it, where they're diabetic and they're overweight and they still can't stop eating, that's a very, very unhappy place to be. They will be freed of that anxiety, of that depression, of that self-loathing. Can you imagine? You're not going to wake up in the morning and hate to look at the scale anymore, to look in the mirror and actually like what you see. These are super good things. So we say, like my tagline is, freedom tastes great. We exactly like Alan Carr, we say you have to look on the positive. That negative is very short-lived, but mainly your life will be freedom from the obsession, that itch that just never ends. You won't have the itch anymore. It'll just be gone. And now when I look at the donuts on my book cover, I think, thank God I don't have to do that anymore. I'm not thinking, oh, I wish I could have those. Mind you, if I had a bite or two, or I had a donut, because I was curious, oh, I haven't had that taste before. When Krispy Kreme came into Canada, I'd never had one, and there's the lineup around the block, and I was thinking, oh, I wonder if that's better than a regular donut. I just thought, forget it. We're not going there, because I don't want to find out and be obsessed. It's a freedom. It's actually not a sense of deprivation at all. It's a sense of freedom, and it's a sense of freedom. Plus, I get to look in the mirror and not hate what I see. And I'm guaranteed, if somebody's struggling with food addiction, they are hating something about their life, if not all of it.
Yeah, and what was it? The American right or something was it health, happiness, and freedom? Well, the amount of people on drugs for depression is the highest it's ever been. Happiness,
exactly.
And if we talk about freedom, so many people shackled to addiction because big corporate has made for just the chasing of profit, and that's all we're talking about. The benefit of the few shareholders of those big companies seem to be outweighing the freedom of everybody else. We have no freedom while we're eating packaged food.
Exactly. Yeah. And I've seen interviews where even the people who make the packaged food say, I wouldn't give that to my kids. This is a job. And, I don't know.
So I know you've got to shoot off in a few minutes. So in the last 5 or 6 minutes, give us some tips, because, you work in an addiction, is the word clinic or hospital, but you work in that environment. And I know I always get told off for oversimplifying things, and it is a hugely complex area because it takes you a month to help people try and break those addictions. And I remember sponsoring a young lad who had a drug addiction. He was in and out of jail in the UK, and every time he'd come out, his dad would bring him over and say, this is the man that paid for you to go on that course and that course. And I just could never get my head around how he always went back to the drugs and so on. So I know it's a hugely complex subject and it's different for everybody, but let's have 3 or 4 tips that won't work for everybody, but we can all maybe have a look at and see if it works in our own scenarios.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the first one, I guess, would be just recognizing that you're fighting a formidable foe, which is nature, which is default mode switch that dopamine turns on. So have respect for when you go into a Starbucks or some kind of food place, and you smell all the smells and all the tastes and stuff. Have respect that this is an addictive drug that is sitting in front of you, or is on sale in front of you. And if you don't, it's not like, oh, I'll just have a little bit, don't worry about it. That's just the addiction talking, by the way. So have respect, have knowledge, learn about it, get convinced. So by watching a show like this, and then reading my book and reading Alan Carr, reading all sorts of stuff, have respect for this phenomenon of addiction. You may not want to call it a disorder, because I actually think it's the brain doing its job in an unhealthy environment. So I don't actually think it is truly a disorder. It's just we're doing what we should be doing in an unhealthy environment, and that we should change the unhealthy environment. So the first one is recognizing this disorder, this discombobulation of our neurochemicals. That would be the first thing. Then the second thing is, okay, given that, the way that I stop is not by using willpower. I'm just not going to eat this stuff anymore. It's by finding a way to protect your environment around you. So that would mean we have phrases like out of sight, out of mind. Throw the stuff away in the fridge because your willpower at 8 o'clock at night when you've had a bad day is not there anymore. It may have been there in the morning when you were like, I'm not going to eat that stuff anymore, but I don't want to throw it out just in case. Because the just in case will happen at 8 o'clock at night and you won't have any willpower. And you're going to be aware of it sitting in the fridge calling to you. So get rid of it. So we say clean out the fridge. In fact, not only clean out the fridge, but if you're going somewhere, prepare your food. If you have to bring your own, because you don't know what's out there. Don't be tempted. And you can remove a lot of temptations. You can say to people, I can't go to the wedding. I'm sorry. Unless you put me somewhere else and don't bring me those foods. Like you're just going to have to, what we call plan, prepare, and protect your sobriety. That's the second thing. The third thing I would say is get support. And we are, again, this is biological default mode. We are social creatures. If you're somebody that doesn't like people, you prefer your dog. I mean, I understand. I love my dog. And there's times when I don't want to talk to people at all. But ultimately, I am a social creature. And if I get my socialness by reading a book, and I'm engaging with the author, even though the author is no longer there, I'm still socializing on some level. I might be doing a meditation and socializing on what we call the generalized other. It's still within the context of social, even if it's not with people. You want to flesh that out as much as possible. The opposite of addiction is connection. And people in treatment centers, so I work in a residential setting where the person's there for a month, they, by the week 3 or 4, are saying, I don't have cravings anymore. I'm fantastic. And then as soon as they walk out the door, they're by themselves. And all of a sudden the cravings come back. And they don't have the people around them to say, like almost like as a buffer. So you have to create your own bubble or your own buffer zone with people. So you're going to tell your partner, don't have the food in the house because I'm going to get rid of it. And when I say I want something, I want you to give me more attention. Maybe not a hug, but just, Vera, what's going on? Or Vera, you know what? I really like hanging around you. I really like the way that you talk about things. I really like your awareness of whatever it is. Get them to give you compliments and connection, whatever it is. It doesn't matter, whatever it is. So that would be point number 3, is to just make that connection. And then I guess the final one, you've already addressed this, but it's so important, is a sense of hope that all of this will it's a gradual process getting out of something, and it will get better. And after probably day 10 or 11, it's going to start getting markedly better every day. And by week 4 or 5, like I said, you can literally say, I don't have cravings anymore. Yeah. I feel released. I feel relieved. So hope is the thing. This too shall pass, and it really will pass. And then the final thing is, don't get caught in the addictive thinking of, I got out of this, I'm good, so that means I can have one, because it'll just bring you right back to square one again.
Yeah, brilliant. And would a 6th thing on there, because a lot of people watching this are very studious people, that's why they're watching, they want to learn things, is it take some time out to understand the difference between pleasure and happiness, and understand the difference between dopamine in the brain and serotonin, because once you kind of go, because normally, don't get me wrong, you can get pleasure and happiness. I mean, sex would be a good example. You can probably get both from it, and therefore it's doing you good. But make sure your pleasure isn't at the detriment of your long-term happiness. So definitely a bottle of wine will give me some pleasure. Well, it does take about that probably, or 3 or 4 glasses, but at the detriment of my long-term health. That McDonald's might be say I'm loving it. In other words, or Happy Meals. It's not Happy Meals. It's the opposite. It's pleasure meals. Actually stealing happiness.
And ultimately unhappy. Yeah. And you know what you can do, just to go on that pleasure contentment thing. If you're feeling really down about something and you think, oh, I've got to have something, go out and give somebody a compliment. Again, it's social and it's contentment, because when I appreciate something, or if maybe not give somebody else, just find something to appreciate. But I find giving a compliment is good, because then people respond back, and then it ends up being a positive experience. But that's really what we're looking for. People say it's the hole in the donut that we're trying to fill. That's the hole, is the connection with somebody else. And the best way to do that is to be nice to somebody. And it might just be, giving somebody a couple of bucks on the street. Doing that will give me a good few hours of contentment in the day. Like it really works.
Wow.
Or just say, hey, I really like your boots, or I really like it was great to see you today. That kind of stuff. That is equivalent to a bite of food, but actually more satisfying long term because it's serotonin.
Wow, maybe that one sentence then can change the world that you've just delivered, because take that chasing of the dopamine, whether it be the donut, the wine, the cigarette, or stop, go and compliment somebody, create happiness to offset the need for the dopamine rush. And maybe everybody watching goes and does that. Hey, we wake up tomorrow and the world might be a better place.
Right on. I like it.
It's been I know you've got to rush off. It's been an absolute pleasure being with you, Vera. Hopefully our paths will cross again at another conference or wherever. Truly amazing. I'm going to push your book to everybody as soon as we finish. Thank you for taking the time.
Okay, can I also just say, if people are interested, I have a Facebook group. I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar Free for Life. If you've decided you want to quit sugar, join the group. It's free. I'd love to see you there. Thank you.
Dr. Vera Tarman, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I'm sure you've heard this before. What is the most nutritional part of a donut? The hole in the middle. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about. I hope you found that really, really useful. And wasn't that an interesting thought at the end, that we're trying to weigh up dopamine and serotonin, and one way to push your serotonin up is to give somebody a compliment. Let's go around being nice to everybody else, compliment them on their dress sense or their intelligence or anything, say thank you, thank you, thank you, and maybe that will help us quash any addictions that we have.